Good afternoon. As promised, here is the ghost story from London. This was 1994, January of 1994, and this is the building and the circumstances under which Mark and I met. I was hungry. I needed my breakfast. I was walking through the hallway, and I could see the man off to my side, walking briskly next to me, almost feeling like I was going to be shoved over against the railing. And I looked at him out of the corner of my eye because I knew already that he wasn't human. And I said, "Knock it off. That's enough of that." And then he moved over again like he was going to, tease me and see if he could make me nervous. I said, "That's enough of that. That is enough. I know you're there. I acknowledge your presence. Knock it off right now." And as we got to the end of the hall and the landing before it went down to the next set of stairs going downstairs, he disappeared. The man looked like he was dressed in clothing from the mid-1800s. It was a gray suit and a vest and a nice cravat sort of thing that was tucked into where his vest came together and was buttoned. And he looked prosperous. He was jolly looking, actually, quite jolly looking. He wasn't scary or creepy or anything like that. But his playful energy was a bit annoying at this point because he was, chasing me down the hall, essentially. Not chasing, but he was just like feeling like he was muscling up against me, and I didn't find that particularly pleasant. Down the stairs I went to the breakfast room. Where I was in a hotel in Chelsea. This hotel had people who would come and stay just for normal stays, a weekend, a week, whatever. And it also had people like me who were long-term residents, where we had part of our meals and we had a room, sometimes large, sometimes small, and we could stay however many months we wanted to. Now, Mark was in the same situation. He was several floors above me. I had never met him at that point. I went into the breakfast room. I got into the line. There were 2 servings. You would go through first and you would get your juice, your coffee, your cornflakes or whatever, and then you would sit down and they would come out, the women who worked there, the young women who worked there, and they would take your order for, how did you want your eggs cooked? Did you want sausage or bacon? Did you want, baked beans on the side? Did you want fried tomatoes and mushrooms? So I'm in the line. And there were 2 young girls from New Zealand. And one looked at the other one, and she kept looking at her like this. She said, "Do you think there's something really weird up on the 3rd floor?" And her friend said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I swear, I keep seeing things out of the corner of my eye, and things are moving around in the room at night. It's like I hear things sliding around." And her friend said, "Yes, but I never wanted to tell you that I heard that." So I looked over at them and I said, "It's just a playful ghost. I've seen him in the hallway. If you're ever walking down the long hallway that's lined with mirrors all the way down the side of the wall," I said, "don't turn your head and look, but just look out of the corner of your eye and you'll see him. And he's quite often walking next to you." And they said, "Well, how do you know about things like this?" And I said, "Because I've seen things like this ever since I was a small child." And I said, "I'm doing a graduate degree, and the topic of my degree is spiritual and paranormal information. Spiritual and paranormal studies, to be specific. And it was under humanities." And they said, "Oh, could we sit with you and talk to you?" And I said, "Sure, that's fine." And they said, "You're not with anybody else?" And I said, "No, I'm not with anyone else." And we sat down and we started to talk. And I shared a few things with them and some tips about, how to feel better about the whole thing and not to be afraid of it. It was just a playful ghost who was still in the house. He was the building was in Chelsea. It was on Oakley Street. And that whole area of Chelsea had identical, beautiful white row houses. And they'd all been built during a very prosperous period in London in the mid-1800s. And I said, he may have been the original owner, who knows? So we started talking, and the next thing I knew, I was watching other people's heads sort of swiveling because they were, listening as they were eating their breakfast and drinking their coffee. And other people started pulling up chairs going, "Can we join this conversation? Can we join this conversation?" And the next thing I knew, I had a circle of people around me and we were talking about these things. And more than once, I heard the exact same phrase that I heard when I was at Goddard, which is where I was going to graduate school, where people would pull up a chair and go, "I've never told anybody this before because I didn't want to be laughed at." And they would tell me a story, a personal story, about how they felt about things and what was their reaction if they saw something materialize and then dematerialize. So, one of the people who pulled up a chair that day was Mark. And he just sat there quietly listening and absorbing. And there were several who drifted off because they had booked sightseeing tours or they were on their way someplace else. But there was like a little core group of us. 1, 2, 3. There were like 5 or 6 of us there left. And most of us had come downstairs. We'd thrown on some track pants and a shirt and a sweater, or a jumper as they call it in England. And we had just come down for breakfast. And I said, "I am absolutely starving. I don't think I ate enough." And then we looked down and we realized it was after dinner time. We had been sitting there all day long since breakfast time. We had never taken a break. Hadn't even gotten up to go to the toilet. And I said, "Okay, I'm gonna have to call time on this. I need to go upstairs, take a shower, put on some clothes, and go out and get something to eat." And there were some lovely vegetarian restaurants on the King's Road, so we went down there. They asked if they could join. I said, "Yes, go ahead." We went down, we got food, we came back, we started talking again, and finally we drifted off to sleep when it was very late. Off to our separate rooms. Back in the morning, all of us back in the morning for day 2 of the same kind of conversations. We talked about everything from the energy of stone ruins where there had been abbeys, monasteries, convents. We talked about how you felt in certain places if you went on a tourist trip and you booked a trip and you went with a guide and you're on a little tour bus or whatever, and you went into a palace, a royal palace, and all of a sudden you were seeing things and you were hearing things. And, how could you react? How could you cope? So we talked about coping strategies. We talked about all sorts of things. That group of people that I met that day are some of my longest lasting friends. I have a few friends from graduate school that I still stay in touch with. Hello, Nettie. Hello, Marguerite. But seriously, hello, Angela. Most of the people that I met back then are still in my life, and we try to see each other as often as possible, but we're scattered in places all over the world. So, now about Mark. Weeks went by, and he said to me one day, over breakfast, "Where is it you're off to every day?" And I said, "I'm going to the British Library. I'm doing research." And he said, "Where's that?" And I said, "It's inside." And this was before they moved it. This was when it was in the beautiful domed library that was at the back of the British Museum. So I would arrive in the morning and I would walk through, the Egyptian wing, and the Assyrian gods were big statues walking by them. And then I would go into the library. And he said, "Do you want some company?" And I said, "Okay, that's fine. I don't know if they'll let you in." And he said, "Well, why not? It's a library." I said, "It's a specific kind of library. You have to have research privileges to go in there. I don't know if that's changed now with the new library, but back then you had to have credentials to be able to not only go in, but have your little written slips sent downstairs, and they would retrieve the books that you wanted for the day." We got to the door, and he wasn't allowed to go in, unfortunately. But he said, "I'll just hang around in the cafe and do something. I'll be here when you get out." And I thought, why would you want to do that? So, yes, I kept doing my research. I came out. I had a stack of notebooks that I had been taking notes in. You're not allowed to check out books like that, especially old books that are very precious. This was how our relationship began. Mark would show up. He would carry my books home. I mean, this is like going back to school when you're young. He would carry my books home. We would talk about art, architecture, literature, all of these wonderful things. And we would laugh about what was going on in the building with the ghosts. Let me have a quick look and see what I'm up to. Yes. Okay. As we started talking in the mornings, and this was getting to be a routine thing, and sometimes we would come back from whatever activities we were all, the ones of us who were permanent residents, we would talk at night. And I got to know the two women who were running the hotel at that time, and they told us some funny stories too. That the ghost used to unplug the vacuum cleaner. They would be hoovering up the room, changing the sheets, and all of a sudden the vacuum cleaner would just go off, and they'd turn around and look, and the plug would be pulled out of the wall and lying on the ground. The water taps would go on and off in the shower while they were trying to scrub the showers. This got to be a recurring thing. Other people, including those two young New Zealand girls, who talked to me several times before they checked out and went on to wherever else they were going next on their trip, they said they would get in the shower in the morning, and all of a sudden you could literally watch the taps rotate. And all the hot water would go ice cold. Or, conversely, they would be scalded. So we talked about all kinds of strategies about how to gently say, no, you need to stop that. And then one woman said to me, I don't always feel like it's him. I feel like there's somebody else. And I said, okay, I've never brought this up. I said, because she's quite sad. And people had seen a young woman, a really frail, she almost looked like you could snap her in half. She was so thin. There was another ghost in the house, and I think she had been a housemaid or one of the serving girls from back then. And she was dressed head to toe in a gray dress with a white pinafore over the top and a little white hat thing, just like a band across her hair. I think it was to keep her hair from falling forward as she was cleaning. And she just looked lost and lonely and very sad. And I only ever saw her a few times. And one night I went downstairs and I was sitting with a hot cup of soup. After hours, we had kitchen privileges. We could go in and, if we had gone to the local grocery store and brought home things, we could heat up our food. And I was sitting there and I watched her and she was gliding through. And she was carrying something. And I heard a noise and then she was gliding back out by me. And I thought, underneath the pavement outside, there was another entry because that had been a coal chute. And the owners had turned, who currently owned it, had turned it into an extra bathroom, an extra toilet. She was gliding into the coal room and then gliding back out. And she had something, and all I could see was from the corner of my eye. So I knew she was carrying something. It was probably a coal scoop where she was going to refresh a fire somewhere in this great big house. She just had such an air of sadness. And I just sent her a wave of energy and said, I know you're here. And I can't remember. I think I said it out loud because there was no one else in the room. I know you're here. I know you're very sad. You do know you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. You are allowed to go. You are allowed to move on. What was really funny was, I thought I was alone in the room. I was, but out in the hallway that led to the breakfast room and the casual lounge during the daytime was the owner, and he and his partner, I don't know if she was his wife, they lived upstairs on one of the top floors in a larger apartment. Okay, now you know what time it is. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he heard me talking, and he said, this building is from the 1800s. And I said, I know. And he said, have you seen the ghost? And I said, oh, yes, I see him upstairs all the time. I said, he seems to travel. And they said, yeah, he goes upstairs to our apartment too. And I said, how do you deal with that? And he goes, well, there's not a building in London that isn't haunted. Previous occupants are still here. And I said, so you don't have any problems with it? And he said, no. He said, we don't have any problems with it. Who has problems with it are the contractors. When they had builders in, because they were constantly remodeling and upgrading the whole building. And he said, we've had electricians who've just walked off the job. He said, we've had a plasterer who was plastering the walls and said somebody came up and tapped him on the shoulder and he turned and there was nobody there. So he went back to working and somebody tapped him on the other side and he said, I've had it, I'm out of here. And they would lose workmen because of the ghosts. Now, there are some people who would say, oh, that's poltergeist activity. Possibly, but it's not like it was destructive, and it's not like it was mean-spirited. There was nothing mean-spirited about it, and my theory is they just wanted someone to pay attention to the fact that they were still there. So, if you're ever in a situation like that, where you know that there are ghosts around, and they're not being mean, they're not being harmful, they just want you to pay attention to them. Just close your eyes and sit very still for a minute and say, I know you're here. I acknowledge your presence. But you really don't need to be bothering me because that's very disturbing. Please don't do that again. Quite often, if you do that, they will not come back. They will not bother you again. They will leave you alone. All right. That's part one of the London story. We have other parts that I will offer in future episodes. When Mark and I went exploring, road trips all across the Isles. I'll be back soon. Please, if you like this content, like it, subscribe. We really need more subscribers. If you followed us over from the original site, which was at A Village Life in France, this is now a second dedicated site. We confused the algorithm over there. That's why I split this off after only a few episodes, so that we could start over again and have people here who were really interested in all things paranormal. So, this is not just going to be about ghost stories. I'll talk to you about that in the next episode. I'll discuss what we're going to do in the future. In the meantime, please help support this channel by liking, subscribing, watching the videos all the way through because the algorithm picks up how much you watch, and then comment. Make comments. Ask questions. I'm more than happy to answer questions about what I've just shared today about our London adventures in 1994. So 31 years ago this month. All right, we're going to end now. Bye for now.